Games Association White Cat Award for Excellence in Game Design, and the author of the deeply insightful and enjoyable book Uncertainty in Games from MIT Press, and just an all-around super genius slash super villain, Greg Costikyan.
So I was evil in a presentation at 11 o'clock, so I will try to be nicer this time around. And the title of this talk really is Save the Whales. And we know what kind of whales we're talking about, I assume. Okay. I'll try to talk directly into the microphone. So this is a company shot of the company I worked for as a teenager. The company was called SPI. They were a publisher of board war games. That's me at 16. SPI published something called Strategy and Tactics magazine, which had a circulation of about 35,000 people, came out 6 times a year, and there was a game in each issue. And if you were a board war gamer and a fan of the genre, this was a great deal because for about the price of 3 games, you got 6 games a year. It was also a great deal for SPI because it meant that in essence they had 35,000 guaranteed sales for 6 games a year, plus they had an installed base of 35,000 users to whom they could market their non-magazine games. And of course, they got less money for the magazine games, but on the other hand, it was going direct to the consumer, it was not going through retailers and distributors. So financially, it was a good thing, and it kept them alive for many years. But they ran into financial troubles, and in 1982, they got taken over by TSR. One of the basic problems with magazines is it's actually a lot like social gaming in that you are willing to essentially spend the cost, the money that you will get from a user for a year's subscription, less fulfillment costs, in order to acquire that user, with the expectation that some portion of them will renew for second and subsequent years. Which also means that every magazine is essentially can declare bankruptcy almost at any time because they have this huge subscription liability that they have not yet fulfilled and they have booked revenue in the past. SPI ran out of money, there was no money there to fulfill those subscriptions, so when TSR took over the magazine, they were faced with a subscription liability actually closer to $2 million. And TSR, being the honest, ethical, and wonderful company that it was, said, we're not going to honor your subscriptions. So essentially, they said to the best customers this company had, they said to the most hardcore board war gamers in the world, fuck you. They lost about 80% of their subscribers. So about 7,000 of those 35,000 people were willing to resubscribe. This was the beginning of the end for the board wargaming market. In the subsequent 10 years, sales declined, not only for now SPI TSR, but also for Avalon Hill, for GDW, for everyone else in that market. Still exists, but it's maybe 2% of the hobby game market at this point, instead of more like 40% as it was then. They killed their whales. If you are a social gamer, you may often have seen screens like this. This is a screen telling the My Vineyard players that the game is being shut down. Or like that. So the question arises, are we killing our whales? This is anecdotal, but here's some things I've heard people say. I spent $300 and it's gone. Yeah, it's gone. Where's my orbital escalator? That's a premium item from SimCity Social. My game. That's all anecdotal, but some of the metrics suggest so, and I'm not sharing any confidential information from Playdom here. I'm being very vague, but typically, maybe 5% of the people who see that we're shutting down the game page will click through to play another game from you. Typically, also, you send out email to your payers from that game and say, oh, here's a special offer, come to play this other game, we'll give you some hard currency to seed you, we like you, you are one of our best players. I've never quite understood what they mean by best players. I think they just mean you paid money. Okay. And also we note that the special offer conversion is inversely correlated with expenditure. So in other words, your highest spenders are least likely to convert to play another game. So this really suggests that you're burning your best customers when you shut down a game. So the conventional wisdom in the field is when your cost per installation becomes greater than your lifetime value, it's time to start thinking about shutting down the game. It's like, why continue operating it? We're not making money out of it. Well, fair enough. Companies need to make money. But every time you shut down a game, you kill whales. Some proportion of those players will disappear and they will never pay again. If you have spent $300 in a free-to-play game and it's gone. Are you ever going to spend money on a free-to-play game again? Maybe. And is this any way to treat your best customers? I think the problem is with virtual goods because the expectation is that once you pay for something, you will have continued possession and use of it. This is a Osaka castle from Gardens of Time, which costs $5. With consumables, I think it's less of an issue because I'm paying for immediate gratification. I come to the end of a Candy Crush Saga. I had to actually purposely try to lose this level so I could see the screen. I come to the end of a Candy Crush Saga thing. I haven't beaten it. I can pay a little money to keep on going, 90 cents. I got my benefit, right? If you shut down the game later, it's probably not going to bother me that much because I got the value for my 90 cents at that time. And I think paying for content is probably okay as well. This is from Plague Inc., which is a mobile game. You can buy the zombie level for another $2. Different gameplay from the other part of the game. So you're getting value for money. You'll play it for a while. If the game goes away at some future time, it's like, well, okay. So as these examples suggest, design can ameliorate the problem. If you're designing specifically to deal with the case of what happens when we shut down the game, you can do a little, you can at least improve it on the margins, but you can't really solve the problem with design alone. Whenever you shut down a game, you're still telling your best customers, we don't want your business and we don't care. I think part of the reason we're willing to put up with this is that the industry is pretty new, and we still, many of us have a kind of a startup mentality. And in a startup, if something isn't working, you pivot and move on. If the game isn't working, shut it down. But at least on the social gaming market, we're in kind of a mature market now. And we need to start nurturing our customers and keeping them around instead of just slash and burn and move on to the next thing. So we need to save the whales. And if we don't do that, if whenever you shut down a game, you're poisoning the oceans not only for your own company, but for everyone else in the space. Because after all, most players don't really track on who the developer of the game is. If these kinds of games get shut down and they're screwed, it doesn't matter who the developer is. This is not based on real data. This is totally out of my ass. But this is kind of a typical Dow curve for a social game. So at the inception, you've done some testing, you've tuned the game a bit, you know what your lifetime value is, or you have a pretty good idea what your lifetime value is, and you're spending a lot of money in terms of marketing to acquire users rapidly, and so your DAO ramps up. At some point, your user acquisition kind of approximates your churn, and you're kind of trundling along on a baseline for a while. And at some point, you reach market saturation. Because after all, even on billion Facebook users, there are only so many who are going to be interested in your particular game. And at some point, you've reached them, all of them, or most of them, and your cost per installation starts going up, and your market size starts dropping. And at some point, you say, it's time to shutter the game. And even if you don't shutter it immediately, you're no longer paying for user acquisition, and you've got churn, and your numbers start dropping off a cliff. The thing about this is that this all typically happens in less than a year, in many cases less than 6 months. True, there are games like Farmville that seem to go from strength to strength, but most Facebook games, most social games, most mobile games do have a fairly limited lifetime, and that's the way things are, really. Except that in other areas, we've seen that online games can last forever. This is a really obscure game, but I played a lot on Genie back in the day. This game has been around for 30 years. It was originally a computer-moderated play-by-mail game. In the 1990s, it was on Genie, General Electric's commercial online service before the internet was open to commercial use. I was paying $6 an hour connect time charges to play this game and was typically spending $200 a month on the game. So, I guess I can say that I'm a whale, at least in some cases. In 1999-2000, transition to the web. It's a pure text game, niche audience, but it still survives. There are hundreds of people playing this game now. Developers are not making a lot of money, but it's basically one coder with a machine in a rack somewhere, keeping the game alive. And it's not the only example. Meridian 59 was actually the first 3D MMO. It was published in 1996 by 3DO. Not as successful as Origins Online or EverQuest, but it had its fans. But 3DO shut it down in 2000, and then Brian Green and Rob Ellis, who are two of the developers, bought the rights back, formed a company called Near Death Studios, which seems like an appropriate name under the circumstances, and kept the game operating for another 8 years, at which point Brian Green decided that actually he wanted to make some money. So he shut the game down, except that he didn't shut the game down. He simply made the server code available to the fan base, and fans keep it alive today. So the reality is that online games die only when you kill them. By nature, they will live forever so long as there are players who love them. And what are your costs really in operating a game? The costs really are salary. Sure, there are bandwidth and server costs, but if these are a huge chunk of your cost, your game is badly engineered. So when the time comes that the game is not making money, certainly move the live team to another project. And yeah, without new content, the game will gradually decline over time. But your whales can come back and see their Osaka castle and play for a little while and remember the glory days. Forget the CPI greater than LTV model. At a very minimum, keep the game live as long as your server and bandwidth costs is less than or equal to whatever minor revenues you generate. And if you want to, you can put some interstitial ads on there so at least you know you're getting some revenues out of your users, even if they're no longer paying hard currency for stuff. And maybe be willing to suffer a small net drain to keep your whales alive. Let your players know, too. Tell them you're not adding new content, but we're keeping the game alive because we love you, and we care about you, and we want you to come back, and we want your business. So, save the whales, don't kill them, let them swim away, and live to pay another day. Treat your customers with love and not contempt. It's only common sense. That's it for me. Questions? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. So we're kind of in a situation where we've got a game that the cost of running it is at and will soon be more than what we're making revenue-wise. We don't want to shut people out, but at the same time, I mean, as a business decision, it seems like the sensible thing to do to sunset it. So we had considered, taking some time to turn it over to an offline model so that people can still continue to play it.
Right.
Do you see any pitfalls with something like that?
Not really. I think if you're making an effort to your customers to say, yeah, we can't really keep doing it this way, but we're going to have another way to do it in the future, I think that's good. Yeah.
Have you thought of the option to make it not free to play, but to open the game only to payers?
You could do that, I would think. Part of the problem is that in many cases, the free-to-play stuff is so deeply integrated into the game design that it's maybe a little problematic to do that. But in other cases, yeah, I think you could just say, okay, all the hard currency items are now soft currency purchasable, and you have to buy the app.
Hey, so what if you have multiple games, right? So you're running lots of games at the same time. How would you feel about having something for posterity as part of your platform, not as part of any specific game? So even if you're shutting the game down, you could have something like, say, an achievement system or something that will remember stuff for you and keep all your virtual goods in there, maybe like a virtual dollhouse. Like, I don't know how many people have played games like the Smash Brothers games, but they have the trophies and you can flip them around and look at them and stuff. So you still have the good old days aspect, you still have the emotional value aspect. You don't have the utility because the utility only existed in the context of a game that's no longer running, but you still have all your junk because we're all hoarders and we all want shit. So something like that might go part of the way, and it's such an obvious idea that I'm thinking someone's probably done it already, so I was thinking if you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction. I mean, in general, I think we're not sufficiently generous with our payers as well. So, even if you really have to shut down the game, why not offer them a big chunk of hard currencies? Like, okay, you spent $300, we'll give you $150 worth in one of our other games, something like that.
Hey, nice talk. So I had a question regarding what to do. So say your Facebook game really isn't cutting it. Like the whole CPI LTV thing, like the server costs. Like you're not making enough money to keep the game alive, and you want to transition those whales to like your next game. What do you think the best way to handle that is? Is it like when you shut down the game to say try this new game, or is it like to start?
Yeah, I see transitioning from one game to another is really difficult because people become emotionally invested in this particular game. And whatever they have built, whatever they have created, whatever they have achieved in this game, well, they're starting from scratch in a new game. Even if the gameplay is very similar, it's still kind of problematic, it seems to me.
So do you have any ideas or like tips as to how to do that, or is that just like...
Do your best, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.